Thank you for joining me on the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, AZ. I find the research and resources and then provide the fire service with the so what, now what, to ensure the health and well-being of every member of our profession. Together, let's thrive. Hey there, it's AZ. This is episode 160, and I just got done recording with my new friend, Arati Rudd. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't remember ever crying on my own podcast before. It may have happened, but I just don't remember. I've cried telling my own story, but never listening to someone else's. And so she's an incredible woman, and I cannot wait for you to hear this episode. And I want you to have a great day. Hey listeners, it's AZ with another episode of the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast, and I'm here with a brand new friend, Arati. How are you today?
I'm very happy to be here.
I'm so happy that you are here, and there's a little bit of a backstory. I think maybe 3 or 4 episodes ago, I did a call to action to all my listeners, and I said, if you know someone in the fire service or even out of the fire service that I should talk to, I want to hear from you. And Captain Hoham called me. He didn't call me. He sent me an email, a wonderful email about Arati. And we had a conversation this week, and now we're fast friends. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
So I introduce my podcast guests by making them introduce themselves. I ask 3 questions. And so the first one should be pretty easy. Who is Arati?
I know we're not supposed to be defining ourselves by roles, but for me, like the best parts of my life are being a mama. So for the past 21 years, I've been Isaiah's mom. That is what I readily respond to. And he's such a wonderful, bright, brilliant kid, but he's a strong personality. So when he was going through school, I was like, if you don't like Isaiah, you can just refer to me as India's mom, who is his younger sister. And then I'm also Josiah and Elijah's mom. So these are the names with which I'm most familiar with. I also have I refer to him as my giant furry redhead of a husband, who is a wonderful human and my best friend. So I'm Timmy's wife. And then for the past 5 years, I've been a medic for the city of Syracuse, and it's been a demanding, wonderful journey. And for the past 3 years, I've been Manlius Firefighter, which has been the most humbling and wonderful professional pathway I've ever taken. And I'm so grateful that I got there.
I'm grateful too. Arati, what sets your soul on fire?
My dad tells the story that I have no recollection of whatsoever. We grew up overseas. So this story is in Mogadishu, Somalia. My dad did emergency disaster relief. And he said he was near the shore with my brother Arjun. And all of a sudden he saw a man running on the beach. And I was 3 years old at the time. And I'm chasing after him. And I'm screaming. And my dad gets out of the water and he just focuses on me because he doesn't understand what's happening. And I'm screaming and I'm sobbing. And he's like, what happened? And I'm like, that man took your wallet and your sunglasses. And my dad's like consoling him. The man's run off. And he's like, honey, what were you going to do? And I said, anything I can. Oh. And he says, that is the spirit that I have never let go of. So while I think about the things that I love most about my life, and I spoke to you about this before, but they're genuinely the least glamorous parts of my life, but they're also where people need me the most, whether it's being a firefighter, a paramedic, a mother. And in any situation, I literally am trying to do everything that I can. And when I didn't have the skill set as a firefighter, I was still trying to do everything I could. And so now I have such like a broad skill set and all these tools in my pocket. But I think it's that same essence that I was when I was 3, but now when I'm 45, I'm still trying to do everything that I can. Long story long.
Artie, I don't know if you could see it, but the tears welled up in my eyes.
Oh,
What are you gonna do? Anything I could.
yeah. And it's like my dad always like, I'm like, oh, do you remember this? And he's like, nope, hard drive's full. Like, and he's 81, he's still working, he's still writing books, he's doing all the things. He's like the longest serving American in the like northern part of Iraq. And like that is his, when people are like, oh, tell me about your daughter, he's like, oh, she's, there's a lot of things, but this is my favorite story. And I, for my memory. Yeah. So
It's not my favorite story too. So, how are you changing the world?
I know this sounds absolutely unfathomable, but my mom had met with Mother Teresa, and when Mother Teresa had said, "Oh, like who are you?" She said, "I'm Artie and Arjun's mother." Like that's how she self-identified, like her purpose in the world. And I never met her, but there's like notes that she wrote, like blessing me and my brother. And she had been famously quoted, I believe, if you want to save the world, go home and take care of your family. And I think like a lot of us who are like when we purpose our lives in terms of the service of others, it's not that we're trying to save people, or like we always say, oh, we like to help people. But like, I think we're trying to save ourselves. Like we're put in situations, or like the news is so overwhelming, right? Like all these people are suffering, and it almost feels like we can't make a measurable difference, right? But how do we save our own selves in terms of like, how do we make our lives matter? And I think for me, making my life matter is in that service of others, but also always family focused. Like I'm always going to come home to my family. A couple of summers ago, my family lost someone so precious to them in the Miami Surfside collapse. And he was born on September 11th. So there's like a lot of layers of, I don't know how to describe it, but like amazing family. The mom and I went to the same high school. And for the last couple of years, we've celebrated his life with the birthday brunch on September 11th. And his sister, when she was just describing what they learned, after his death. And then when I described like becoming a firefighter was like my reaction to feeling that helplessness over Elon. Like I was sitting in New York and I just felt completely crushed by the experience of what was happening in Miami. And I wanted to learn it all. Like I wanted to do confined spaces. I wanted to do rescue. Like I wanted to save somebody that I couldn't. And she said in her culture and her like social religious culture, you save one life, you save them all. And I always held it like, and since then I text Elon's mom in the middle of the night whenever I have a quote unquote save or a medical call that I feel like I knew I was exactly where I needed to be because I made a measurable difference in that call. And I text her and I was like, oh, and she's, lives in Miami. So like in the middle of the night, I'm texting Elon's mom, just letting her like, oh, in Elon's name, this is the person that I helped today, and it gives like such a layered approach to my experience where I couldn't do anything for him at all. But I still feel like I'm doing things for him.
We're a mess. Now we're both crying.
I know. I cry happy tears, I promise. And I cry frustrated tears. My coworkers yesterday, they're like, are you ever going to get mad and angry? I was like, I get frustrated, but like I skip the whole, you're a jerk. I'm angry with you. And I just like like I get really frustrated and then I want to do something, you know? So, and then I might cry. Yeah.
I just cry. I just cry, especially when other people are crying. So tell me about the transition between I feel helpless, but I want to do something, and I'm able to do something. So what did that path look like from I'm not a firefighter to now I am? Go back as far as you need to.
Oh, the journey's long. So for me, um, like there's been like, I find it strange that things like on a national or international level, like impact me directly, but I think it may impact us all. So September 11th, 2001 was the date I had graduated from college. I had been working in Hilo, Hawaii, where my parents are. And that was the day I was moving to go move into my, like, I was going to go live with my future husband. So the flights were canceled. My mom woke me up at probably 4 a.m., the time difference. And my dad was in New York, and she said, your papa's safe. I was like, she's like, but I need you to come upstairs. I need you to be with me to watch what's happening. And I think like my life completely changed in that moment. Like I always had such a focus on being good or being the best, like being the best student, being a good daughter, being a good employee. Like that was always my focus. And I kind of let life happen to me. Like, but I also felt like I was waiting for life to begin. And then I was like, oh, what am I waiting for? And I remember like a couple of days later when the flights resumed and we're able to go to Honolulu, and my future brother-in-law were talking about joining the Marines, and Mikey made a face. I made a face. So Mikey was like, why? What would you do? And I talked about like, oh my God, like for me, like my heart is with all the firefighters. And he's like, why? And I was like, there's no way they're going into that building thinking everything's going to be fine, but they're literally doing everything they can, right, to help others. So for that moment, and I was like, I'd become a firefighter, and I didn't see female firefighters on my island. It wasn't like conceivable to me that it was the pathway I would take. Like for me, I come from like a very open-minded parents, but they're very traditional in the lifestyle that they led. So for me, like education was very important, but then so was marriage and children and building a family and creating a beautiful home. Like those were the singular goals that I thought were put on me, right? Like it was not like, it was definitely like be anything you could be, but make sure you check off these boxes. And so it was always in the back of my head. And when I came to Syracuse, there's female firefighters, and they're strong, they're tiny. Some are like not so tiny, and there were twin sisters. And then I believe even like the deputy chief was a female firefighter. I was just, hey, this is possible. There might be only like 14 or 16 out of like 300, but I saw them. So I think like when you think about representation, and they were themselves, they were comfortable in who they were, and they were different. They weren't like, there was no like cookie cuttering of them. And now with my experience with a whole bunch of firefighters, I think like they're their authentic selves. They're quirky, they have their own hobbies, they have their own passions, but then they're all common goal oriented, right? Like we are going to come together for this common goal of putting out this fire, or for this cardiac arrest. We're all going to work together. So that whole cohesion happens, but it's not because we're the same. It's because we have the same goal. And I love that. And so I was working at SUNY, State University of New York, with adult educational programs. And one of them was EMT programs. And I was like, oh, this seems like something I'd like to do, because our students struggled with it. And once I took it, I realized like, oh my gosh, like there's no end to what you could learn. But for me, every critical call that I was on, once I became like a paramedic, the city firefighters were also on, and they work differently than private EMS in terms of like they really are focused on that one situation, and just their level of teamwork was very different than my other experience. And I thought, oh, like they create sustainable careers because of this cohesiveness that they have, in terms of like same goal orientation. And the firefighter exam was coming up, and I was like, my husband is like the most encouraging person. If I told him I wanted to fly helicopters, which I have, he'd be like, sure. What's the pathway look like? How long is it going to take? Because like, how are we going to afford it? You know? So I was like, the firefighter exam is coming up. And he's like, there's no way. He's like, and he probably said something very protective. And then like he knew about my brother-in-laws and my brother. And then I was like, I think this is my way of building all the skills that I think I need in my pocket to fulfill my purpose. And he's like, oh my God. Like once you reframe it that way, he was like, here's the check, fill out the application. I will go hand it in. And I scored 100. So for me, I think like you can put yourself out there, but life has to meet you halfway. Like my daughter's a junior in high school. She's going to go through the college application process. Same thing. I was like, everyone's like, where are you going to go to college? And she's like, I don't know. And I was like, perfect answer, because you really don't know. You can apply to 20 schools, maybe 10 of them accept you. Like they have to meet you, right? You can put yourself out there, but like life also has to meet you, and then you can make those decisions. So that was one of those moments where like his wife scored 100, and then he was totally on board. Like he was like, oh, this is the pathway. And then I got injured. We walked our 2 little infants in our neighborhood every night to like chat and put them to sleep. And we're at the end of our like driveway, which is like 150 feet. And he's like, honey, a truck's coming. And I looked back, but I stepped forward and I slipped on like a patch of ice. And I could hear my ankle go crack. And I was like, honey, you have to take the kids. My dad comes from Hawaii for chunks of time to Bob. We call him Bob. And you have to come get me. And then he physically carried me. He's 6'5". So like the fact that he grunted the whole 100 feet down the thing was like
offensive.
Offensive. Like he's strong, man. But so he took me, and then I remember calling my paramedic partner and saying, hey, I don't think I can come in tomorrow. And he said, what did the x-ray say? I was like, I didn't get any x-rays. My foot's in a bucket of ice. It'll be fine. He was like, you tell people you don't have x-ray vision. He's like, I'm telling you the same thing. Go get an x-ray. And it turns out I had a spiral fracture. They put me in a cast. I was out for 16 weeks. So in that 16 weeks, I get a call to interview at the Manlius Fire Department. And I inform the chief that I was recently injured, but I would very much like to meet with him. And he was like, absolutely, come on in. So I come in a full cast and on crutches. And he's like, never have I ever done an interview for a firefighter with somebody who's literally broken. And I say, I'm not for you now. I was like, but what if in the future I get stronger? And he's like, what if you do? And I think he was being very gracious. I'm sure in his head, he was like, this nut. But then I took that opportunity. And that's why I'm such a fan of physical therapy. Because when I went in, they're like, what is your goal? And I was like, New York State CPAT. And the physical therapist was like, I don't know what that is. And I pulled it up, and he's like, no problem. He's like, it's going to take you a ton of work. These are injuries that if people don't heal correctly, like you wouldn't be able to do emergency med. So forget about becoming a firefighter. And we took all the time I needed to heal, to strengthen. And then I was hired. And for me, the interview chief said this like 2 days ago, so I could repeat it. He's like, they typically slot a half an hour. Somewhere in the first 15 minutes, I was like, I'm going to use all the words. And an hour and a half later, there were still, and there's still people that I talk to, the chief, the deputy chief, and the captain who did my interview. And I think that's really important when you have work environments that are like, there's a lot of risk involved, a lot of personalities. You need to be able to talk to your leadership. They may not do everything that you want them to do, or you may not even know what you're trying to express. But I think for me, being in environments where I'm comfortable having tough conversations with the people who are in charge is incredibly empowering for me. A lot of my life, I just thought being like a good employee was just making it easier for everyone and working really hard, but it was never, hey, how do we make this better together? I never thought that was my place. And we're in a combination department. I believe there's 18 of us who are career, and then we have like 35 really dedicated volunteers. And from everything that we do, there's some level of participation. And we have a new hire who's wonderful. And after our first critical call, our patient had PEs, had a GI bleed, clots the size of cherries, and he's doing everything like that he can within his skill set. I was like, what did you feel? And he was like, I was just taking it all in, and how you guys all come together and you work together so well. And he's like, oh, I can't wait to be one of those people who works together so well. And I was like, you already are. Like, you did everything in that moment that you possibly could. You're so receptive. You listened. You gave, afterwards, you were willing to talk about your experience and what you thought about it. And I was like, that's the biggest thing, is like us being able to work together. And I was like, did you feel alone in any part of that? And he said, no. And I was like, that is the part that I love the most. Is I don't know why I always felt alone, like professionally, and to a certain extent, probably personally, where I felt like I always had to resolve my own problems. And that even in like family life or marital life, it wasn't something that we did together. And I've since learned better. But joining the fire department was that moment where I didn't feel like I had to fix it by myself. Like, I felt a togetherness, and that sense of, it wasn't necessarily loneliness. I can't describe it, but it was a sense that everything was on me. And while I take full responsibility of what's happening around me, I also know that I can ask for help. And it's probably asking for help. That is the hardest thing for me, is asking for help. And now I don't hesitate. And I was like laughing at myself between yesterday and 3 years ago, before I became a firefighter. Asking for help was probably the most, I felt crippled by it. Like, it was physically and mentally painful for me to ask for help. And I wonder why. But now I'm like, I take great pride in my work. I am incredibly enthusiastic about learning and training and working and taking all the calls. I love it. But I don't hesitate to ask for help. I'm really grateful for that.
Have you heard of the Roger Bannister effect?
No.
So I think it was in the 60s. They had determined that it was impossible to run a 4-minute mile.
Oh, yes.
And then Roger Bannister ran it. And then I think like 17 or some huge number of people did it within the next year.
Yes. I wasn't familiar with the name.
Yeah. You said something that I hear from women all the time, which was, I didn't see anyone else doing it. But it is so important when we do see someone else doing it. It's incredible. We see another female firefighter, and then we realize we can do it.
I realize the impact even I have. Like, in the grocery store, kids always, are you a fireman? Absolutely. And for me, being called a fireman, I know it's the greatest honor, right? Like the fact that they don't see me different, but they see me different, is delightful in my world. And then the number of like gym mates that I have who have now like were pre-med students who are like, hey, like Artie's super smart. She has a master's in public health, and she's like a happy firefighter, mother, and they're like, I need to check this out. Like, so I've been there for 3 years. The amount of like females in our community who have joined, and yeah, they may still go on to medical school, but learning what your body can do to like physically help somebody is incredibly different in this world where we're really taught a different value set, even if no one's ever said it, just by our exposure alone, just by the culture alone, like being gross and stinky and people cheering you on because you broke a door, like I'm watching it. I sent you my profile picture was day one in the firehouse, and I'm in turnout gear, and my name is on the locker, and it is the happiest I've ever felt. And since that time, I've seen probably 8 other female firefighters like wear their turnout gear for the first time. Like I can recognize their delight. It's so hard to see yourself, right? It is so hard, but it is so easy to see and know, oh my God, I know exactly how she's feeling. And I make sure I take that photo because it is like that moment for them. They're like, oh my gosh, like I am my own hero. And whether there's a firefighter who's 45 who just got into medical school at the age of 45 who also has 5 children. I mean, these are my heroes, right? But I was there when she first put on turnout gear, and like that feeling of it's undescribable. It's undescribable.
I will never forget when I was very new on the department. I used to teach a class called Learn Not to Burn. So it was for the 3rd graders. And, we taught them the typical stop, drop, and roll, and make sure your pot handles are turned inside, and, exit drills in the home. We taught them all these things. But I was at a fire alarm. Now I'm all choked up again. Fire alarm.
Very emotional.
I had no idea. At an apartment building, and I got off the truck, and some of the children from the class were residents at the apartment building, and they were so excited. I could see them. They were like, it was like a volcano. They wanted to say something and they didn't know quite what to say. And what they ended up screaming was, it's the fireman lady.
I love it.
They just didn't know what to say, and they were so thrilled to see me. Oh my gosh.
No, it is like maybe I always had that admiration and respect, and like, oh, these are super cool people doing super cool things. But then to like be on the other side of it, and then I have like ultra fans in my little ones who are 4 and 6. And for them, I can do any amount of errands in the day as long as it ends with we're going to the firehouse. Like they are attentive. They've been to union meetings. They've been to anything. It's sat there quietly. And can we go to the firehouse? Can we go through the maze? Like it is their golden carrot. And I was like, oh, if I can be that way for my own children, like I can only imagine, I can only imagine.
You know what? I have a lot of questions about your academy training, but I think we missed a little piece of the story because you talked about it's your brother and your brother-in-law, correct?
Yes, brother-in-laws, 2 of them. Yeah.
Brother-in-laws. Okay.
Yeah.
that were going to sign up to be Marines, and then
Yeah.
you said you would be a firefighter, and then what happened?
They become firefighters, all of them. No, one is now like a rescue chief. One has since retired from the fire department, and one is a Mauna Kea ranger. So he's Mauna Kea is the highest mountain on my island, and that's what his career is now. But I remember being like, oh my gosh, like I thought it was fascinating. Like I loved it. I was jealous. I was very like awestruck. And then for them, like they would tell me stories, and a lot of them were like them processing really tragic things that happen and really difficult things that happen. And I remember thinking, oh, this is so beyond my skill set, right? Like Mikey's being dropped out of a helicopter to go dive into a cave to go rescue a body that's already decomposing. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think I suffer from claustrophobia just listening to this. So they were literally describing all my fears, where one of his coworkers ran over their 2-year-old and, it passed away. So like, everything that I could possibly be afraid of, or like these were what he was describing. And I'm so grateful that they were there. But I didn't think I had the capacity, like physically, mentally, to manage this, because I didn't have the skill set and I didn't have the exposure. I was just getting the firsthand stories of somebody who was like just processing through a really difficult call. And then once I started to like break off chunks, like the first step in Hawaii, you do the lifeguard test. So I was always like a lifeguard. So I was like, okay, physically I can be a lifeguard. And then I was like checking off boxes to get as close to it as I possibly could. But it took like 4,500 miles later in Syracuse, New York, to get there, and to have a dream for, let's say, 22 years and fulfill it without compromising on any one of my dreams. Like probably my biggest dream was to become a mother. And Isaiah's 21 now. And so like to have your biggest dream come true, and then you're like, okay, what else? I know life is asking so much of me. Like I have so much to give to my life and to others. And then once you think of that kind of like, what can I do? You keep wanting to pursue it in whatever ways you can. And for me, I was really great in like administration and creativeness and writing. So for me, like a master's in public health was all encompassing. Like public health is very prismatic, just like a firefighter does everything. Like public health covers everything. It's not just epidemiology, it's the sociology and economics of everything, disease, health, all. It's so multifaceted. And then like the bubble burst probably for me, where I was like, programs don't help people. Like people help people. Like you can create all these interventions and all these like learning opportunities and all these like public health interventions, and they create great opportunities for the people running them and the people administrating them. But I didn't see measured improvements in the lives of the people that it was meant to help. And eventually, like it wasn't long, but eventually you can't live. Well, I don't know. I can't live because I like pour myself into my work or my family with that sense of like BS or inauthenticity or in like you're ineffective in what you're doing. And I kept returning to, hey, I can help this one person at a time. And I remember I ran this educational program called Second Chance Opportunities in Education. and I had 33 students. They were all either on probation, parole, or recently incarcerated. And one of my students had gotten all these construction and welding certifications while incarcerated, and he wanted to pursue a construction management program. And I was like, so cool. And then week 2 of the program, an instructor, not of the program, had come up to him in front of the class and had accused him of taking her like thumb drive out of the computer lab because she had gotten to the security guard and asked him to review this footage. And when I asked to review the footage, like sure enough, it shows the class coming in, him sitting down at the computer, and him pulling out a thumb drive and, putting in his pocket. And I was like, rewind all the way to where the teacher is sitting there. And so you see her take it, put in her thumb drive, work on the computer, take out her thumb drive, put it in her purse. And then like a couple of hours later, he comes into class. But he's so embarrassed, right? Like this is he's been recently incarcerated, like just released from incarceration. This is his chance, his second chance at life. And somebody's accusing him of stealing something that he didn't do. And he never comes back to the program. Like I email him, I call him, I text him. He never responds. And I understand that he feels ashamed. He's, like put himself out there, and he was berated in front of a whole class for something he didn't do. And then when I would moonlight as a paramedic while working for SUNY. And one day we had a difficulty breathing patient. And I remember, coming with the ambulance to the patient and the city firefighters being with him, and they're shaking their head. And I was like, he's walking. He doesn't seem to have a difficulty breathing. I was like, why are they shaking their head? And then I hear like they've asked for like police intervention because he's so angry and combative. And I was like, I can't help myself. So I get out of the ambulance and immediately starts walking towards me. And I was like, he can't speak. Like he's just trying to say something. Tears are flowing down his eyes. And for whatever reason, I say, do you know me? And I live in the neighborhood where I serve here on the south side of Syracuse. And he nods his head. And the firefighter, Arati, do you know him? And I was like, no. And they're like, oh, he's so much calm now. And I was like, do you want to come sit in the ambulance and I can evaluate you? And he's like nodding, and I go in, and then he sits in the stretcher. Just because he can't speak, we're just doing the whole neuro eval. And I was like, okay, we can't get his name, nothing. I was like, are you born in January, February, March, April? He holds my finger for April. Is it the 5th, the 10th, the 15th? And I go to the 20th, and I was like, okay, April 16th. And he nods, and then he passes out. Like, so, and then we cut through his thing. We're getting him to the hospital. He has like his skull is exposed in the back. He has obvious bullet wounds, recent stab wounds. So I get to the hospital. They immediately take him to scan. He has a brain bleed. And then they're like, what was the interaction? The ED doc is asking me. And I was like, I asked him, like, he was combative until I asked him, like, do you know me? And he said, yes. And they're like, do you know them? I was like, him? I was like, no, I just sometimes ask them, and it like diffuses the situation. Because either then they look at me, they think about it. No, I don't know you. Or yeah, I saw you treat my neighbor or something like that. And then I was like, oh, he told me his birthday is April 16th. And they're like, how did you get that? And I was like, okay, holding up my fingers. And so they pulled up, and they're like, what year? And I was like, I don't know. I was born in 1979. So like maybe he's 30 something. So it's like put in this block. And sure enough, the first name that pops up was my student from 3 years ago. And I was like, oh my gosh, I do know him. I would never recognize him this way. And they're like, oh, you definitely, like, he was to the point where he's about to fight, like, because he was just frustrated and angry. And now he's getting the, like TPA, they're doing everything that they can. And I remember that being the turning point for like me pursuing being a firefighter and paramedic. When I came home, I was like, honey, there's nothing I could do, like as a workforce development counselor to help this person. But today, like I was really able to help him. And it was just one person helping another person. It wasn't any program that I created. It wasn't like the 3,000 adult learners that I've put through construction, EMT, security guard, none of it. This is the one person that I made a measured difference to, and this is how I did it. And I was like, I want my life to have meaning. It has tons of meaning and purpose because it's so family focused. But if I have to leave my family, I want my children to always know that it was for a reason. Being a firefighter isn't a job. It's definitely a calling. Like people do this for free. So I need my kids to know that I'm leaving to do something that I love and I believe in, and that's full of meaning and purpose. Otherwise, why am I leaving home, you know? And then I want to be that example for them, to find whatever it is that gives them all that meaning and purpose, that so that they can tell their children, you know, this is how you live, and this is how you're part of a community, and this is how you have all that meaning.
Hey everyone, it's AZ. We're back after some Oklahoma crazy weather, technical difficulty, and Artie was in the middle of her story regarding the day that she was truly able to make a difference when she hadn't been able to make a difference for her student 3 years earlier. And so I just want you to kind of pick up on that story so we can put the exclamation point on it.
No, I'm not quite sure where I left off, but for me, it was like that pivotal point, where I remember coming home, telling my husband, um, that I really wanted to definitively change my career pathway, and instead of moonlighting as a paramedic, like pursue becoming a firefighter, and working that pathway, because I need to do something that I believed in. And if I were, and it gave me so much like meaning and purpose to be there for that one person. And I wanted to make the rest of my life, career wise, focused on doing something that I completely believed in. Because if I were to leave home, like my kids give me tons of meaning and purpose, but if I have to leave them, I want them to know I'm doing it for all the right reasons. And then I want to set that example always in terms of finding your purpose in life. It doesn't necessarily need to be your career. It can be what you do for your volunteer experience. Like, we have firefighters who do it, right? They work a bread and butter job, and being a volunteer firefighter is what gives them that meaning and that sense of community focus, because we are all connected. We're wired for that connectivity, and we are wired to care for one another. To the extent that firefighters do it, where they will die for anyone, fundamentally, that is what we would do. And when I say not everyone is wired that way, there's some self-preservation, but we don't hesitate, to the extent that people, can make a career out of that, like personal, drive that they have to care for each other. It's definitely where I found myself. And I always want my kids to have that sense. Like, if I have to go, it's because I love my work, I believe in it, and it's to serve a higher good. And I want them to find whatever pathway that is for themselves. I'm really grateful that I got there.
I'm all choked up again. But I already know. I hope you agree. I already know we're going to have to do a second part, but I want you to tell the listeners, because you and I spoke on Monday when we first met, about your experience with the residential academy and how your department was cheering you on, and how I want to hear that experience.
It was such a struggle bus experience for me. I think probably the structure of that experience is made for somebody coming out of high school who's lived at home their whole life. But the nature of firefighters, career firefighters, is that we're maybe in our 30s, like late 20s, 30s. Just there's a whole lot more like a variety of experiences that we've been through. And I was the oldest anything they've ever had, right? Like, let alone being a mom, a 5. I think I was still nursing my youngest when I went there. It was such a humbling experience. And then to take someone who's so like academically driven, like I can thrive in any you need me to learn anything, I got it. And then not having like the physicality or the familiarity and trying to build skill sets that I needed at least more than one time to do. And because there's so many students, I was one of 5 who didn't have Paramedic experience. Everyone else, like my favorite company mate, like he was a federal firefighter for 14 years. Like we were night and day in terms of like what I could do. But then I would come home on Thursday nights and like somebody on shift would always meet me just to decompress and talk to me about, and send me back home. And then I'd come back to the firehouse on Sunday and like work on skill sets because it's an incredible fire department. It's my only fire experience. So I just presumed everyone was like us, right? Like everyone's trying to develop everyone's personal skills so that we as a department can be the best department we can be. And everyone's meeting everyone where they're at. So that I'm a 43-year-old mommy doesn't even make anyone in my department blink. They're like, we just need her to get from A to Z and we're going to do everything that we can. So I'm pulling hose through the deputy chief's like barn, like putting out the 10 fires, like flooding his second story, and then cutting roofs with Lieutenant Sherman. Like everyone's built like we're gonna get her. Like for somebody who didn't even have the language, like I didn't know what a standpipe was. Like the chief always jokes when he says, "What did you learn today?" And I was like, "Oh, I learned how to bang hose." He's like, "Oh my God, do not ever say that to your husband." He's like, "What the heck are you talking about?" And I was like, well, there's like, they taught me how to like, attach the LDH to the hydrant. He's like, "Hit the hydrant?" I was like, "What an arbitrary thing." Like, but hitting the hydrant, it was as obscure as like banging hose to me. So that is where my mind landed. And he tells that story all the time where he's like, yeah, she doesn't always speak English so well, but she'll make you laugh. But for me, everything was new. Everything new, the language, the culture, other than knowing that I had like a department who was like so invested in my success and also so encouraging of me as a whole person, right? Like recognizing that I'm a thoughtful, I'm a reader, I'm a mom, all these things that they valued, like so big on nutrition, like teasing them, like I currently have a bet. It's going to take me $2,001 for me to eat a donut, but there's just a principle involved. And they're like, "Why 2001?" I was like, "I'm not going to do it for $2,000. But I do have a tipping point. But just because I was like, we're firefighters, we're athletes, like we don't need to eat like, like we're not invested in our bodies, So for me, it's like a daily commitment to do the best I can, always to do the best I can. And they're like, everyone's doing the best they can in their own way. And so just the amount of like care that they took into me learning all these skill sets and knowing that I loved it all, like everything that I was exposed to, like whether it be hazmat or codes, like everything for me was just something I wanted to learn, even if I was terrible at it. And then I was like, oh, these are developable skills. Like there's some people who are just the physicality of them alone, they're going to have greater success than I immediately would have. Doesn't mean I can't do it. And then I slowly realized like I was chipping away at every fear I ever had, right? Like small spaces, like whatever it may be. And I remember the first time in live fire, I was just like looking, oh my gosh, it's so pretty. And that was my like, and then somebody knocking on my helmet, well, do you want to put it out? And I was like, oh yeah, I can. Like, you know, and then realizing, oh, I could articulate, like I was always prepared my whole life for like house fires, like personally, because it was like a genuine fear. And I do believe like preparedness is paramount, but I have no fear about it. I mean, I have like a respectful consideration, but it's not something that I would ever hesitate to put myself in that situation where, like, yes, it may be scary and maybe all the stressful and maybe all these layered of experience, but it's going to be okay. You know, I can do something about it. Versus before I had no exposure whatsoever. So, yeah.
I feel like our paths are similar. Hear me out. I always say that every single piece of what I ever did, it doesn't make sense on paper.
No.
The path from being a high school student to being a biochemist, to being a strength and conditioning coach, to being a firefighter, to being a business owner, to being a PhD student, it doesn't make sense. But every piece was important to make the whole puzzle. And I think that's the same with you.
Without a doubt. I think of moments in my life that have been like crushing, miserable, where I felt like overexposed and completely lost. And when I look back on it in like the story of my life, when I encourage people to have like, to make a story, right? Like when you're like 88 or 98, like, what is your story going to look like, right? Like, what are you afraid of? Like, why do we live in fear of like our capacity, you know? And I think about, oh my gosh, the lore of Arati is absolutely almost unbelievable. Like, but it is the story of my life. And there's no one domino that I would remove because everything cascaded into something else.
Usually I ask about dogs, but I'm not going to do that today because I know I'm going to have you back really soon for a part 2. And I think just what you just said was so powerful and impactful that I want that to be the last thing the listeners hear.
Thank you.
I'm so grateful for your captain. I'm so grateful for our meeting on Monday, and I'm so grateful for my new friend. And I think that we should drop the mic. What do you think?
I think so too. Thank you for everything.
I think so too. I've never cried this much on a podcast episode before. I don't have a tissue, so I've got like
I know.
streaks
And I've
on
been
my
in this
shirt.
t-shirt for 24 hours, so like a few tears won't hurt, you know?
All right, well, this has been AZ and Arati, and we are officially out.